Hello again, beautiful souls. Laurie Rivers here with another episode of the Holistic Healing with Laurie podcast. And today I have a great episode for you. We're going to be sharing an excerpt from my recent Long COVID and ME CFS Holistic Healing Summit, which had amazing speakers. So without further ado, let's dive right into it. Welcome back to the Long COVID and ME/CFS Holistic Healing Summit. I'm here with Dr. Bill Rawls, who I got to meet recently over an Instagram Live, and I really love the work that he's doing and the connections that he's making and his whole theory. So I'm very excited about this interview. Welcome, Dr. Bill.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes. Yeah. And before we get started, I just want to say that this is not medical advice. This is for informational and educational purposes only. And yes, Dr. Rawls is a medical doctor, but you need to be working with him specifically in order to get medical advice. So just want to put that out there.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So Dr. Rawls, I love hero stories. I love background stories. I'd love to hear, and for those of you out there, to hear your particular story of how you came to this approach that you now take to chronic illness, to long COVID, to ME/CFS, to Lyme.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey, an interesting journey. And, looking back on all the hardship that came with it, I don't know that I'd trade it, because it has taken me to a different place of thinking. It's carried me to a different place as a physician, and it's brought opportunities that I wouldn't have had otherwise. So that part of it has been pretty cool, but it's changed the way that I think about chronic illness, all chronic illnesses, and caused me to ask questions that I would have never asked. So my career started about 30 years ago, a little over 30 years ago now, medical school, and then specialized in obstetrics and gynecology. I like that field because it was mainly dealing with people who were mostly well, and delivering babies was just really cool, bringing life into the world. But the downside of it back then especially was it came with really rigorous call. I was obligated to 24-hour hospital call every second to third day and every second to third weekend, if you can imagine that. And that was on top of a busy office practice. So at any point in that 24-hour period, I could get called to the hospital. And that happened all the time. So when I was in my 30s, I could get away with it, but it was really living life, this stressful practice, trying to be active in the community, have a family. And what got shorted was sleep. And, so I just stayed sleep deprived. As I got into my 40s, I just wasn't bouncing back like I did when I was younger. And by age 47, I was starting to have some pretty significant health issues. My everything was breaking down, my joints, my heart. I had all kinds of heart irregularities, brain problems, everything, all the things that people with fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue and long COVID are having. And conventional medical system really wasn't much help. They had drugs for symptoms, but that was about all. Testing wasn't really significant. I ended up in that category of chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia. And all along, though, I just reasoned that the only thing that could really do that kind of havoc inside the body was a microbe, because even after I cleaned up my diet, stopped taking call, the symptoms didn't go away. It was just perpetual. And it was like something's going on. So I, like many people with fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue, kept trying to find that microbe. And eventually I found the microbes that were associated with Lyme disease. Thought, hey, that's the answer. Just antibiotics, I'll be well. Things are going to be great after that. But the antibiotics made me sicker instead of better, and caused me to really abandon those conventional routes and look for alternative therapies. Became certified in holistic medicine. I tried a lot of stuff, But the thing that finally helped the very most was herbal therapy. And here I'm talking about pretty intense doses of very specific herbs, not the kind of thing that you'd find in an average health food store. But the herbs were very safe, that they had a great safety profile. I took them because they had been defined as having antimicrobial properties. I was like, we got to kill those microbes. We got to suppress them. And I gradually got well. And it's taking me another 15 years to really figure out what the herbs were doing and how it was very, very different than my original expectations, and how that applies to virtually any chronic illness, including fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, long COVID, but beyond that, really any chronic illness. What chronic Lyme disease person hasn't asked the question, am I developing Parkinson's? Am I developing multiple sclerosis? So there's a lot of overlap. And turns out it's not just one microbe, it's lots of microbes. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So I love having this conversation with you because I feel like I'm about 15 years behind you as far as the recognition that it is all microbial based. I had an idea of it when I started passing worms, when I was in my 20s and had severe ME/CFS. But I like you were talking about the stuff that you find in the, just in the drugstore and a health food store. It just didn't, I kept trying to do those types of cleanses, a parasite cleanse or a heavy metal cleanse or candida cleanse or whatever. And it made me feel a lot worse, and it didn't help at all.
Yeah.
So I would love to talk to you about, well, and this came up too. I think this is going to be helpful for everybody to hear as well. What was your experience as a medical physician going to other doctors, in the beginning of this stuff, to try to get some help, to try to get some direction or answers?
Oh yeah. It was terrible. You become the patient, and the tables turn, and, suddenly you're this patient that, that the guy walking through, the girl, whatever physician walks through the door, healthcare provider, they're probably not going to know how to help you. And that's going to be very frustrating for them. And, you can just see them roll their eyes when they walk in the door. It's like, here's another one with that long list of complaints that I'm not going to be able to help. I really don't want to deal with this. I've got 5 minutes per patient, and this person is going to take 30 minimum. I don't want to deal with that. And so I get it. Our system is not set up to handle chronic illness.
Yeah.
Our system is set up for acute intervention, and we do a great job of that. You come in with a pneumonia, a broken leg, a heart attack. Hey, we're going to do a great job for you. But you walk in with a list of 20 complaints and everything, and your body's falling apart, and we're not really sure why. We're not going to have an answer for that. And the reason is, and the thing that I've learned that's really important, pharmaceuticals are not designed to treat chronic illness. And there are very specific reasons we can talk about that as we get into it. But we just don't have the right tools for chronic illness. We treat chronic illness like acute intervention, and it doesn't work. So it doesn't really matter what chronic condition you talk about. So, and it's especially true with chronic Lyme disease. Chronic Lyme disease, they don't even recognize it as a diagnosis. There's no code for it. They don't want to see you, and so it's really frustrating. Long COVID has gotten better attention, but it still frustrates doctors because they don't understand it. They don't understand what it is or how to treat it.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that you and I have talked about, and that you mentioned also, is that it is the root cause that we're talking about here is these microbes. So
Right.
how how do people know if they have a microbe problem, and how do we get all of these different ones? Because I know that when I was healing from lifelong fibromyalgia, that the last piece of the puzzle that fell into place for me was Lyme. I had never even considered it before. I think I'd been tested like decades ago or something, and of course it came back negative. So it's like these things have the potential of all interacting, right?
Right.
Let's talk some about that.
Okay. To talk about it, we have to talk about the body differently, and we have to talk about microbes differently. And I think when you start doing that, it changes the playing field and opens up doors to how to treat it properly. So looking at the body, we tend to look at it as a whole. You know, a doctor looks at the body like it's an automobile. You know, we flip up the hood. We make jokes about that all the time. But the body is actually a composite of trillions and trillions of cells. So the smallest functional unit in the body is a living cell. So we are a function of our cells working together. Everything that happens in the body is a function of cells, whether that's your heart beating, thyroid hormone being produced, or your joints being knitted back together. So cells do everything. Our health is a function of the health of our cells. If all our cells are healthy and they're all working in synergy, in other words, all of our hormones are balanced, because hormones balance cellular functions, we feel great. Symptoms are a reflection of stressed cells. So whatever symptom it is, it's a reflection of cells being stressed in the body. Localized symptoms, like if you block off a coronary artery, then the cells in your heart aren't getting nutrients and oxygen, and they start to get stressed, and they will die if that isn't rectified. So that's where we can really help out. But symptoms like fatigue suggest that cells throughout the body are being stressed. So all cells, this is the basics. This is fundamentally what wellness is. This is the formula for wellness. All cells need the right nutrients to generate energy and do their job, a contaminant-free environment, free of natural toxins like mycotoxins, but also petroleum and pesticides and all of that. Downtime to recover, sleep, really important. Good blood flow from movement. That's essential for our cells to flush away toxic waste and that sort of thing. And then protection from microbes. And so even if you're doing all those things, there's that microbe factor. And we think about infections that are really terrible that we register with bad symptoms, like Ebola virus or an influenza or acute COVID. But the fact of the matter is we encounter microbes all the time. So you have to ask, what do the microbes want?
That's a good question.
What do they want?
Do you want me to answer?
Sure.
They want to live.
Right. So what do they need to live?
They need nutrients.
Food, right?
Right.
Food. Every living thing needs food. Bacteria, viruses, protozoa, they need nutrients. They need, carbohydrates and fats to generate energy and to build new viruses, build new bacteria, build new protozoa. So the food source is our cells. So when we look at an infection, what it is a microbe trying to cross barriers, either through the lungs or across the skin through a tick bite or some other insect bite, or sexually transmitted. Different microbes choose different pathways. They're all trying to get in our body to get to our bloodstream, because the bloodstream is the highway to all the cells in the body. Cells are food, but cells are also protection. And we know that many microbes invade our cells. So when you get a tick bite or a COVID infection or whatever, the microbes are trying their best to get to your bloodstream. Your immune system is trying to get rid of them before they get to your cells. So there's a confrontation. So when we get an acute infection, That confrontation between the microbes coursing through the bloodstream and the immune system is what causes fever and malaise and some of those acute symptoms that are pretty much uniform for all different kinds of microbes. A lot of different kinds of infection cause fever, malaise, those same kinds of feelings, because it's the same kind of reaction. But even with the best efforts of the immune system, we know that some microbes get through, that they make it to cells. And when that happens, if your cells are healthy, the microbes invade the cells, and sometimes the cells can expel the microbes. We know that happens through a process called autophagy, that they basically expel the microbes, get rid of them. If your cells are weak or stressed, or the microbes are just overwhelming, then they kill some of the cells, and we can feel that too. Something like a bad infection like Ebola virus, it's really bad because our immune system doesn't have any built-in tools for Ebola, and it just hits the bloodstream and ravages all the cells in the body. It destroys them. But this other thing can happen that is pretty recently, we've only been aware of this and, really looking at it in the science for about 5 years. And that is microbes can become dormant inside cells. In other words, they invade a healthy cell. The microbe becomes dormant, not alive, not dead, just kind of walled off in the corner of the cell. The cell keeps right on functioning and the microbe is there. And it turns out that that's happening all through our lives. So when we pick up Ebola virus when we're children, it becomes dormant inside our cells. Mycoplasma, chlamydia, all different kinds of species. Tick-borne microbes. Most people who get bitten by a tick do not get acute symptoms because the infection is generally mild. They don't even know what's happened. Course through their bloodstream, becomes dormant inside cells. It's like a time bomb, just waiting. And it turns out this is happening over and over and over. Things are crossing from our gut, from our sinuses, from our gums, all over. And they're getting in our tissues, in our brain, and our heart, and our joints, throughout our body. They're calling it the dormant blood and tissue microbiome. Yes, you do have bacteria that are dormant inside your red blood cells right now. Lots of them, lots of different kinds. So this idea of a infection with a microbe can occur with that acute infection. But when these chronic things, long COVID, chronic Lyme disease, it's not just that initial microbe, it's reactivation of all the other things that are going on in your body. So that's why, it's pretty typical that people find that they have reactivation of Epstein-Barr and other kinds of viruses and mycoplasmas and all of these other things. Well, those are just the things that we know to test for. So when we come around to looking at chronic Lyme disease, I've found, this is just ones we know about, I've found over 100 species of bacteria that can cause Lyme disease chronic-like symptoms in the body. So there's a lot of stuff beyond just the classic microbe that causes Lyme disease that can cause some of these things. And typically we find that people with chronic Lyme disease, they're becoming positive with everything they get tested for. And I think we're just scratching the surface. So I would say that's what chronic fatigue is. That's what fibromyalgia is. For a long time, they called chronic fatigue Epstein-Barr syndrome, but then they realized, well, some people didn't have Epstein-Barr and there were other microbes associated with it too. So they said, must not be microbes. Boy, that was a good choice. But they didn't understand this reactivation syndrome of dormant microbes. So yes, all of those things are real. And I think that's what's going on with not only these illnesses, but we're starting to find connections to various microbes in multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's and dementia. And we're finding connections to atherosclerosis, that atherosclerotic plaques are looking a lot like a biofilm with microbes from the gut and everywhere else. So all of these illnesses, we're finding these microbe connections, not just indirect connections to the gut, direct connections with the presence of these reactivated microbes.
Yes.
And as we start looking at chronic illness more and more like this, the frustration that so many doctors are going to have is we don't have any drugs to treat it. Antibiotics don't fix this.
Yeah.
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 So it's a big deal.
Yeah. And so we've presented a quite overwhelming problem.
Yeah.
Good news, though, is that we're going to be talking about herbs in just a second here, and making and simplifying some things. In the meantime, there was something else that just came up. Oh yeah, so when we think of our microbiome, typically we think about the gut,
Yeah.
right? But I want to make sure that everybody understands that your microbiome is actually your whole body.
Yeah. The
So
largest collection of bacteria is in your gut, and that's because there's a lot of free food there from the food that we're digesting. But we have the gut lining that is supposed to keep most of those bacteria confined to the gut. If you rupture your bowel, it's a really bad thing because it releases all the bacteria. But it turns out that bacteria from the gut do trickle across into the bloodstream continuously throughout your lifetime. And several really interesting studies where they were looking at autopsies of people's brains with multiple sclerosis and Alzheimer's, but they also were comparing them to like normal brains from people that had died of something else. They found hundreds of species of bacteria inside brain tissue, and in everybody, healthy people and diseased alike. And a lot of these microbes actually came from the gut and the skin. They came from our body. They were residences. So they're trickling across. And interestingly, I found a study in 2015 that shows when you have dysbiosis from taking antibiotics or eating a bad diet, that trickle becomes a flood of pathogens into your bloodstream, into your tissues. So all microbes want exactly the same thing. They want to get to your cells because your cells are food and offer protection and resources that they need to survive. So even the ones in the gut we have a lot of things that we define as pathogens are ones that do that want to get across those barriers into our tissues. So another level of our defenses against microbes is really important is our normal flora. And these are bacteria that aren't as aggressive. They don't try to cross over, or at least, they don't do damage if they cross over into the bloodstream, but they do suppress these pathogens on our gut and our skin and other locations. So when we take antibiotics long-term, that suppresses our normal flora, which is one of our most important defense mechanisms. So you have to be really, really careful about not doing that. Short-term use of antibiotics with fast-growing bacteria that are outside cells, like in acute pneumonia, yes, absolutely. Antibiotics are the right solution. But chronic reactivation, antibiotics are not necessarily a great choice because of that factor of suppressing the normal flora.
yeah. When I think about, and I ask my students about this too, but when I think about my own antibiotic use as I was growing up, it was like candy being handed out, it was every time I went to the dentist, it was anytime I came in with any sort of symptoms, it was, and I think that we're getting better about that now, but I
can't help but think that so many people that end up with various kinds of chronic conditions through their lifetime, so many of them that I talk to are like you, got bombarded with antibiotics during childhood, disrupted their normal flora, and the rest of their microbes, all those pathogens just had a free-for-all. And it's not uncommon.
And that wraps up our segment for today. Now, if you want to hear the whole thing, which I highly recommend, and to delve deeper into long COVID and ME CFS and the Holistic Healing Summit,
with 35 plus other experts, you can head over to longcovidsummit.com or mecfssummit.com. And there you're going to find not only the full interview, but also a plethora of other resources to assist you on your healing journey. And as always, please, if you found value in this episode, share it with someone who might benefit from it. Really want to spread the word of hope and help as well. And please remember that your journey to healing is a journey to self-discovery as well. I know that sounds cheesy, but it really is. Everybody that I've talked to who has fully recovered has said that they learned so much about themselves, which is really helpful. So keep shining your light, and I will see you in the next